Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we really try to unpack complex ideas, pull out the crucial insights, and, well, give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
We're glad you're joining us again. We're going deep into the thinking that has really shaped our world.
Yeah, and in our last deep dive, we laid out those three core pillars of what we call classic American liberalism. It sort of sets the stage for understanding the bedrock of the American experiment.
That's right. And today we're honing in. We're taking that deep dive into the first of those pillars, Scottish moral philosophy.
hmm And the focus today is on this really fascinating idea. It's the concept that human beings, well, we're born with a kind of internal compass for moral truth.
Exactly. It's often called moral sense theory. And look, this isn't just some dusty, abstract thing tucked away in old books. It's actually profoundly foundational.
Foundational to how the American founders thought about things like liberty, law, virtue.
Absolutely. It provides a really vital lens, for understanding their whole worldview.
And that's why this seemingly old philosophy matters so much now. What happens when liberty gets untethered from this internal compass?
Does it just become preference?
Yeah.
Or power?
Right. Does it start looking less like real freedom and more like, I don't know, a free-for-all? There's this risk, isn't there, of liberty kind of devouring itself.
Is it still liberty if it's not anchored? If that innate sense of right and wrong fades away?
Good question. So let's dive in. Let's explore the roots of this idea because they're surprisingly powerful.
Okay, so where do we start? To really get this idea of an inner moral compass, this moral sense, you have to begin with Francis Hutcheson.
Hutcheson, yeah. An incredibly influential figure, Irish-born, but a Scottish philosopher, taught at the University of Glasgow, early 1700s.
A real pioneer in this way of thinking. He laid so much of the groundwork.
And he asked this question that sounds simple, but it's, well, it's profound when you stop and think about it. He asked, how do we know what's good?
I mean, just pause on that for a second. If someone asked you why something is good, what's your first gut reaction? What do you point to?
And Hutcheson's answer for his time was pretty radical.
Oh, absolutely revolutionary. Before him, you had these dominant views that maybe reason alone gets you to moral truth. Or maybe it's purely divine command, imposed from outside.
But Hutcheson comes along and says, no, we actually possess a distinct moral sense.
Right. Not something you just learn by memorizing rules, not something you figure out through complex logic step by step.
He described it as what a natural, intuitive faculty, something inside us.
Exactly, an innate capacity. Part of our human makeup, he argued, that lets us perceive good and evil, virtue and vice, almost like a sixth sense, but for morality, a direct apprehension.
He even used an analogy, which I think makes it much clearer. He suggested that perceiving good and evil is as immediate, as inherent, as our eyes perceiving light and darkness.
That's a great analogy. You don't calculate brightness, do you? You don't logically deduce color.
You see it.
And Hutcheson argued our moral sense is like that. It just perceives good or bad. It strikes us immediately. No complex reasoning needed first. It's like an instant recognition.
Yeah, he put it very directly. There's a quote, the perception of beauty in virtue is not deduced from reason, but strikes us at once with the force of intuition.
That quote really nails it, doesn't it? The implication is huge. Moral judgment isn't this cold, detached calculation like solving a math problem.
Or just following orders from on high.
Right. It's immediate. It's deeply human. It hits us innately. This was such a departure from the rationalist philosophies that really prioritize pure intellect.
Or theological views focused solely on divine command.
Hutcheson was suggesting this inherent immediate connection to the good was just part of being human, which, if you think about it, suggests something quite remarkable about human nature.
That we're wired for morality.
In a fundamental way, yeah.
Yeah.
That it's part of our constitution, our design, a built-in guide.
That is a powerful thought. Hardwired for good. And I think, most of us can probably recall moments where a moral truth just felt right. Or wrong, exactly. Maybe you saw someone act with incredible kindness, or you witnessed something deeply unfair.
And you didn't need a flowchart to figure out your reaction.
No. There was this immediate, almost visceral recognition. It resonated. That's the relatability of this old idea, isn't it? It speaks to that common experience where the inner compass just points clearly without conscious effort.
A reminder that beneath all the analysis, there's this deeper intuitive layer.
Okay, so Hutcheson gives us this intuitive moral sense. But then comes Thomas Reid.
Reid, often called the father of common sense realism.
What's common sense realism, quickly?
Well, fundamentally, it's the idea that our basic human intuitions and perceptions, what we perceive through our senses, our basic understanding of the world, are generally reliable, that there's an objective reality out there and we can actually know it.
Which was pretty important in an age where skepticism was growing, questioning if we could be certain about anything.
Exactly. And Reid took Hutcheson's moral sense idea and really expanded on it. He gave it a more robust philosophical anchor, connecting it firmly to objective reality.
So it's not just that we feel something is right.
Reid's saying that feeling points to something real, something objective outside of our own heads. He argued our moral judgments don't just appear randomly or from subjective whim.
Where do they come from then, according to Reid?
They stem from our very constitution, as he put it, meaning how we are intrinsically built as human beings. Our nature as rational and moral creatures.
It's part of our fundamental makeup embedded in us, not just learned or felt fleetingly.
Yes. And this is where his contribution gets, well, as the sources put it, huge. Because Reid stated directly, and this is another crucial idea, there is an essential distinction between virtue and vice. And this distinction is not created by human will, but perceived by the understanding.
Okay, unpack that. Why is that huge?
Because it flies directly in the face of so many modern ideas. The idea that morality is just, a social construct, a custom, something we just sort of agree on, or worse, something we invent based on preference.
Like fashion.
Exactly. Reid insisted morality is something we discover, not something we invent. He argued moral truths aren't relative or subjective. They're objective. They're universally knowable. They exist independently of what we might want or what our culture says.
As real as gravity, but in the moral sphere.
That's a good way to put it. It implies a seismic shift in thinking. If moral truths are objectively out there, waiting to be recognized, not just conjured up by us, think what that means for justice, for law, for everything.
It means some actions are just wrong, period.
Yeah.
Regardless of opinion polls.
Precisely. Regardless of cultural trends or personal feelings, there's a real moral landscape.
And if you can objectively know right from wrong, if there's this essential distinction, as Reid says, that you can perceive,
then that knowledge naturally leads somewhere. It leads to the concept of duty.
Duty. There's a word you heard constantly from the American founders. Duty to God, duty to country, family, fellow citizens. It was everywhere in their writing.
Absolutely foundational for them. A moral North Star guiding their actions, their public service.
But listen to public discourse today. When was the last time you heard a politician or a public figure seriously talk about duty?
It's almost vanished, hasn't it? It's striking how absent it is.
That's a stark contrast.
It really is. The founders clearly believed rights came with responsibilities, with duties. Duties to yourself, to others, to this shared moral order they believed in.
So, like, the right to free speech might imply a duty to speak responsibly, not just spout whatever you want.
That's the kind of connection they saw. But what happens when everyone's focused on asserting rights, but nobody talks much about the corresponding duties? Duties to the community, to that shared moral framework.
It raises a big question for us now, doesn't it? What have we lost by letting duty fade? Does focusing only on rights without responsibilities, does that pull society apart?
Does it become just a cacophony of individual claims with no sense of reciprocal obligation? It's something to seriously reflect on.
Definitely. And that thought, that connection between morality, duty, and a functioning society brings us right to the American experiment itself. How did these Scottish ideas actually cross the Atlantic and shape politics?
Well, the key bridge figure here, the person who really connected the theory to the practice in America, was John Witherspoon.
Witherspoon, hugely important figure.
Absolutely pivotal. He wasn't just reading these Scottish thinkers, he was a student of them, immersed in their ideas in Scotland. Then he emigrated and became president of Princeton, the College of New Jersey, as it was then.
And at Princeton, he wasn't just an administrator. He was teaching the future leaders of America.
Dozens of them, including James Madison, who, becomes the main architect of the Constitution, a future president. Witherspoon was essentially molding the minds that would build the nation.
So he's not just some obscure academic. He's actively shaping the founding generation. And he brought this moral sense theory right into the core of their education.
Made it a cornerstone. It wasn't an elective. It was fundamental to how they were taught to understand the world, human nature, government, everything. It permeated their thinking.
And what was one of his key teachings flowing from this?
A really crucial one was his definition of liberty. He drilled this into his students. For Witherspoon, liberty wasn't just freedom to do whatever you feel like, no restraints.
Which sounds like how many people think of it today.
Perhaps. But Witherspoon taught that true liberty was specifically the freedom to do what is right.
Okay, that's a very different definition. Freedom to do what is right.
A profound distinction. It suggests real freedom isn't just boundless license, but the capacity, the moral ability to choose the good, to align your actions with that inner moral compass. Liberty tied to virtue, not separate from it.
And he issued a warning, too, didn't he? Something quite stark.
He did. A warning that echoes right down to today. Witherspoon said, "A republic, once equally poised, must either preserve its virtue or lose its liberty."
Wow. Preserve its virtue or lose its liberty. Let that sink in. That's not just abstract philosophy. That's a direct warning about the political system itself.
It's incredibly stark, almost prophetic. The implication is crystal clear. If the moral virtue of the citizens collapses, if that inner compass is ignored or breaks down, then the entire constitutional order, the republic itself, is in danger of collapsing too.
So for the founders, self-government wasn't just about clever structures and checks and balances.
Those were important, but they believed it fundamentally required a virtuous people. People capable of governing themselves morally, guided by that shared sense of right and wrong. If that eroded, they feared the whole experiment could fail. It could lead to tyranny or maybe anarchy.
And you can certainly look through history, or even look around today, and see examples where maybe a decline in public virtues seems connected to instability or threats to freedom. Witherspoon's warning feels pretty timeless.
It certainly does, which underscores how deeply these ideas, this whole moral universe, permeated the founders' thinking. It's easy to just focus on, say, John Locke writes, consent. And Locke was important, no doubt.
But they weren't living in a purely Lockean world.
Not at all. They inhabited this much richer, more complex moral universe, profoundly shaped by Hutcheson, Reid, Witherspoon. Their intellectual landscape was broader and deeper.
And the core ideas floating around in that universe weren't just about rights.
No. Concepts like duty, virtue, and natural moral order, these were central. They weren't just tacked on. They formed the very framework for understanding human nature, government, society. They believed this moral order existed before government.
Which implies rights aren't granted by government,
but are inherent, flowing from that natural moral order.
Okay, so let's look at the Declaration of Independence again through this lens. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That self-evident takes on a deeper meaning, doesn't it? It wasn't self-evident based on, a show of hands or what was popular opinion.
It was based on that inherent human capacity, the moral sense, to recognize these truths.
Exactly. They believed these truths were woven into reality, universal, knowable, and that humans were equipped to perceive them, not just deduce them logically. A profound claim about our ability to grasp moral reality directly.
And James Wilson, another key founder who studied these ideas, later a Supreme Court justice, he put it very powerfully.
He did. In his lectures on law, Wilson said, "The law is found in the breast of every man. He finds it within himself."
Wow, found in the breast of every man. That's striking. The most fundamental law isn't external, imposed by a king.
It's internal, a discovery within yourself, a law written on the heart, you might say. It points to this shared human bedrock of morality that cuts across cultures and time.
Now, it's really important to clarify something here because this gets twisted easily today. This idea isn't radical individualism, right?
Absolutely not. That's a critical distinction. It's not saying everyone just makes up their own truth, leading to chaos where it's just my truth versus your truth.
So what is it then?
It's what philosophers call moral realism, the belief that the law of nature, maybe nature's God, is objectively real and written into the human soul, into our constitution.
So it's universal, discoverable.
Yes. You discover it within yourself, but you're discovering something objective, something real and shared, not just inventing a personal preference. It grounds morality outside of pure subjectivity.
That distinction feels vital. The difference between morality being invented, making it shifting sand, versus being discovered, making it more like solid ground.
It is vital. Think about it. If moral truth is just invented, what happens when my invention clashes with yours? Who decides? But if it's discovered, then there's a common standard, something real we can appeal to, debate about, strive towards. It completely changes the foundation for society.
And how does that connect or maybe disconnect with where we are now? Let's fast forward to the present day.
Well, when we look at our contemporary public discourse, the contrast is pretty stark. The absence of those older terms is noticeable.
Terms like moral sense, duty, virtue, You just don't hear them much in public life anymore, do you? It's almost like they're archaic.
It feels that way sometimes, and it's a critical observation. We talk endlessly about rights. Rights are everywhere, in every debate. Individual rights, group rights.
But the discussion often happens without connecting those rights back to the deeper moral roots that the founders thought made them meaningful and sustainable.
Exactly. For them, rights weren't just these standalone claims floating in space. They flowed from a moral order and came with duties. It feels like we've kept the branches, maybe the fruit, but we've forgotten about the roots. Or maybe we've even tried to cut them away.
Which leads to this weird, almost paradoxical situation we're in. We've inherited this tradition, this American experiment, that clearly saw liberty as requiring conscience. They're tangled together.
Inextricably linked to that innate moral sense.
Yet at the same time, there seems to be this ongoing effort to hang on to liberty while simultaneously denying, or at least downplaying, the very moral foundation that was once seen as essential for it.
Like trying to keep the building standing while chipping away at the foundations, trying to navigate with a compass you believe is just decorative, not actually pointing north. It creates this inherent tension, this instability.
The core question for today, the one I think you really need to grapple with, is this. If conscience is just a social construct, something we make up,
Or if morality boils down to just personal taste, like choosing vanilla over chocolate,
then what actually makes liberty different from just raw preference, unanchored preference?
if there's no objective right or wrong underpinning it, what stops liberty from just becoming license? What stops it from being dominated by the strongest preference, the loudest voice, the most power?
Does it just become a power struggle where my liberty to do what I want clashes with your liberty to do what you want, and there's no higher principle to appeal to?
It's a fundamental challenge for a society that wants to be both free and ordered, isn't it?
It really cuts to the heart of things. And I think you should consider, what are the potential consequences for society when that underlying moral framework for liberty, for rights, starts to erode or dissolve?
What does it mean for shared values? For any sense of collective purpose? How do we even govern ourselves if the ground beneath our moral compass turns to quicksand?
If right and wrong are purely subjective, how do we build anything lasting together? How do we resolve deep disagreements? It's a heavy thought, but a necessary one.
Deeply necessary.
So as we wrap up this particular deep dive, we've traced this thread from Scottish moral philosophy, especially that idea of an innate moral compass.
And seen how it provided a profound anchor for what we're calling classic American liberalism.
We've seen its connection to objective truth, to the concept of duty, and how the founders saw it as absolutely essential for the stability, the very survival of a self-governing republic.
It really was a cornerstone belief for them, much more central than we often appreciate today.
And that idea, that connection to an objective, inherent moral truth, leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought to carry away.
Which is?
Well, if that law found in the breast of every man, as Wilson put it, is forgotten, if we lose touch with that innate moral sense, or we decide it doesn't really exist,
then how do we discern right from wrong in a world that feels increasingly complex and polarized? What guides us then?
if the compass is dismissed as just opinion, what do we navigate by?
A question worth pondering, definitely.
And that very notion of objective truth, that foundation, is exactly where we'll pick up next time.
Right. In our next deep dive, we'll move to the second philosophical pillar, common sense realism.
We'll be talking about Thomas Reid again, naturally, his defense of human reason and perception.
And how that philosophy helped shape an American view of reality that pushed back hard against radical skepticism, embracing the idea that we can know objective truth through our senses and common sense intuitions.
And we'll explore why this wasn't just some abstract debate for philosophers in dusty rooms.
Absolutely. We'll see why it was considered fundamental to the very basis of American law, the idea of informed citizenship, and the whole project of self-government. It's about whether we can trust reality itself.
So join us next time for that. Thanks for diving deep with us today.